start filming now?
Yeah, we're all go.
Okay, so hello, my name is Martina. I'm going to talk about building for the page editor. So we're going to talk about things like what do you have to do as a bare minimum to get the page editor to work with your project. And that's not just from a development point of view, but what kind of stuff do you need to tell your designers, your UX people, everybody that kind of paves the way for your development at the very end of the process. And also, what kind of development things do you have to do in order to get the page editor to work at all. Then we're going to talk about some of the nicer things. So how can you improve the author experience in the page editor? What can you do to make your authors actually want to use it? Then I'm going to talk about how do you detect that you're in page editor mode and how can you use that to further improve the author experience at the previous point. And ultimately, we're going to talk about some of the bonus features you get. So if you build to support the page editor, what do you kind of get for free? And I don't mean like money free, I mean what you get out of the box just functioning magically. And lastly, we're going to do a quick bit about, well, Sitecore MVC, does that support the page editor? If so, what do I need to think about if I'm using Sitecore MVC and I want the page editor to work? So first of all, everyone else, so everyone who isn't a developer, what do you need to think about when you're starting a project and you want to use the page editor? And it actually starts with all your UX, your IA, and design. If they make decisions early on that have an adverse effect on the development process, then your page editor kind of implementation is going to be a lot harder. So that's things like this. So when you get a design, which is usually the first step, or the UX, the wireframe, usually the first step, you need to sit down with them and kind of go, well, what are your components here? Have you thought about you have a gallery, or you have a menu, or you have a spotlight of some kind. So they start to think of pages not as pages, flat HTML, but as something that's made up of little bits, because that's ultimately how developers are going to build it. And if they do the hard work from the start, it's less horrible for you guys. So componentize your designs. Chop them up, get designers to move them around to really get a feeling for the kinds of problems that you guys might come across. Secondly, nesting. So do I have a 2-column layout here? Do I have like slices of a page? How can I build my page up? So like a bit like using Legos. Do I have, I have one big like little plane, I can put Legos that represent columns inside that. I can put Legos that represent spotlights of some kind. How many of those sort of vertical divisions do I have? So 2, nesting. 3, how many variations do I have? So do I have a spotlight that's got, one with borders, one without, one with a red background, one with image, one without? And often, I find the designers usually hide these things, so you might get to the design, go, wonderful, you've got a white spotlight here, and not realize that they've got a red version hidden in some layer called layer 45. So making them aware that that actually makes a difference, you knowing exactly what the style variations are before you get going. And finally, movement. So I've got a component, where can it actually go on the page? Is that going to impact my HTML? So if I'm relying on a body class, for example, news or something like that, if I have a news listing component that I suddenly want to use on the homepage, is that going to crash and burn because I haven't thought about that in the HTML? And it just means that if the designers, the UX people, the people doing the HTML, I should have put that up there, sorry, have thought about all of these things beforehand, then hopefully when you come around to doing the implementation, it'll work smoothly because they've kind of taken all the hard work out of the componentization bit. So that's step 1. You don't have to do this. I mean, the page editor is going to work, but it might take you longer to implement. So let everyone else know what the implications are of the page editor. Stuff's going to move around. Make sure they know that. Then we get to the development bit. So the first thing to think about is when you are setting up items, data templates in Sitecore, that just represents your data. So your data has no responsibility whatsoever to their appearance. What this means practically is don't have templates called 2-column item. Don't have fields called sidebar or footer, because that's just data that can be made to appear anywhere on the page. And if you name things like that, you don't really get the flexibility. So if you had a mobile, what's it called, like a mobile device or something, if you eventually want to use Sitecore as part of a service to deliver your data, if you have a field called sidebar, this doesn't really fit with the whole separation of data and presentation. So think about that first. And that's actually something that the UX people can think about as well. If I've got a car, it's not going to have sidebar text and header text, it's going to have like a type, model, engine size, that sort of thing. That's step one. The second thing is make use of component definition items. So I'm actually going to go and do a demo after this, but each one of these components becomes a little thing that you can move around and reuse on a page. Thirdly, make use of placeholders. So once I've created all these components, where can I actually glue them on the page? And that's kind of the bare minimum you have to do to get the page to work. You have to construct your implementation so that you're looking at modules rather than individual pages. The other sort of two things that are quite useful is using data sources. So I put a component on a page, it can suck content up from it somewhere else if you want to, which means you're reducing the amount of repetition you've got. So I only define buy this car now as content once and use it in many different places in many different ways. And finally, parameters. So this is ways of defining properties for an item once you created it. So as devs, you create an instance of a class and you set different properties on it. That's kind of what parameters is from a Sitecore point of view. So I'm going to do a little demo and show you kind of how this all works from a website with no chair. But that's fine. So, not that. I have a little site about Pokemon here in page editor mode. And so we talked about you have to componentize. So all that means is everything is in a separate little like ASCX file, it's a sub-layout or a rendering. If you're using MVC, it's something like a view rendering or a controller rendering. But what that looks like in Sitecore, and I know a lot of you already know this, but it'll be a good refresher, is, I've already got it here. I've defined my components. Sorry, I need to go again. Layout. Eventually. So I've defined my components. So I don't use static binding unless I absolutely have to, something like the header or the footer. The recommended practice is to give these different icons so people can differentiate between them. They need to have a nice name so people understand what it is. So don't do like camel case or dots or anything like that. And the only thing else is you make Sitecore aware of this file. And once Sitecore's been made aware of this file, you can place them anywhere you want. So step one, componentize, make sure they're in Sitecore, make sure they're readable and friendly for the user. Step two, which was placeholders. If you don't define a placeholder settings item, then the placeholder will not be selectable in the page editor. So if I go into the page editor, not that one. Go to the page. These little fields here, they won't become visible unless you specified a placeholder settings item. And all that is it just declares the key that you've got in your HTML. So, two parts, componentize, make sure you've got a placeholder settings item. And really, that's pretty much the only thing you have to keep in mind in order to get the page editor to work, like the real basics from a kind of componentization point of view. So as long as you've got your placeholder settings item, you've got your components, that's going to make the page editor work. Okay, back in here. You can, of course, mix this with static bindings. I'm not saying you're not allowed to do that, but you are, that's fine. The other thing I want to talk about was, okay, I can move blocks between areas on the page, that's wonderful. So I am reusing bits of, just like user controls, I'm reusing bits of functionality everywhere. The author can go in and do this now, so I, as an author, can go in and say, add something here, get a little pop-up. We've all seen this, spotlight or something, and it'll output some content. So that's the fundamentals of using Sitecore. The reason I'm reminding you of all of this is because there are still quite a lot of partners who will hard code or use one layout per item, and it doesn't make it very flexible, and that doesn't. You don't support the page editor when you do that, because an author cannot go in and change the layout of an entire page. So it's just a reminder. The other thing that you should do in order to support the page editor is make use of data sources. So a data source, practically speaking, is I've just put a spotlight over there, I'm going to go in and click on this little associated content button, and I'm going to wait. There we go. And I'm going to pick an item that's got nothing to do with this one. So I'm going to bubble up content from somewhere else in the content tree. Suddenly I've got content that's mixed in from the context item, but also from somewhere else in the tree. So componentize, placeholder settings, make use of data sources. And for those of you, I don't know, nothing's changed in 7.0 or 7.1. The code still looks the same for doing that. It is just, I go, so this is my code for the spotlight. Just make this a bit bigger. That's pretty much it. So you're saying, get this component, sorry, this user control controls parent, which is a sublayout, and then there is a .data source property on that sublayout. And that's how you say, actually, don't use the context item, the item I'm viewing, go and fetch something else. And then the second thing you have to do is you have to force your controls, so these bad boys over here, these ones, to use the data source rather than the context item. So you're saying, you go behind, all of these should use the data source instead. So nothing's really changed from Sitecore 6. It's all the same. So componentize, placeholder settings, make use of data sources to reduce content duplication. And the final thing, which is part of the fundamentals, is making use of parameters, which I only really discovered a year ago and I think are amazing. So parameters are a way of giving components properties per instance of use. Time. So you could say on the actual item in Sitecore, well, I want the Squirtle item to be blue. Yeah, Squirtle. But what that means is that if it's used anywhere else, it's going to be blue there too. So you're kind of losing flexibility you're losing separation between presentation and data. So you kind of want to, anything that's not defining what Squirtle is, which is a Pokemon with a blue picture, you don't want that to be part of the item. You want that to be part of the presentation details. So you use parameters. And parameters, in their very basic form, are just a dictionary. So if I click on the properties here, scroll to the very bottom, that's all parameters are. And you can put in whichever ones you like. This is a problem because, is that a nice way for authors to do it? No, they're going to mess that up. They're probably going to put in like an int where a string is required, but for basics you can do that. So I could do color. I can't remember a single hex code now. C. There we go. Oh, that wasn't different enough. Does anybody know a hex code for anything? Except for black and white.
0, 0, 0. What color do you want?
I want red.
F0000.
Hey, thank you. Hooray! Oh, that's disgusting. But that data is not part of that item in Sitecore. It's part of the presentation detail. So again, very important to separate your data from your presentation, because on another page I might want that to be less garish and disgusting and be blue instead. So that's the basics. Use data sources. Use parameters to style things. I mean, you can use that for loads of different things. You can use that to pick a heading type, which I've done on the training site. So depending on where your component is on the page, change it from an H2 to a span, for example. Or you can use it for hiding and showing the image. Or you can use it for styling like I've done there. Anything really. But it's really versatile, and all it is just a kind of a little dictionary, and you can do whatever you like with it. And the code for that, again, you get that from the sublayout object. And it's just dot parameters, turn them into a collection, and then you can just retrieve them. And I've just used them as a property here, which I'm outputting there. So a bit ugly, but yeah. So, as far as componentization goes, that's it to make the page editor work, really. And you can see that if your HTMLers haven't thought about the fact that you might want to vary the color, they might bake all of those properties into one class, which means you have to go back to them and say, well, I know you called this spotlight and it's red, but the client actually wants a green one and a blue one now, and then they're going to have to unpick their HTML and their CSS and kind of make fixes. So if you let them know beforehand that you're expecting all of these, it should make life easier for you. The second thing to make the page editor work is to do with the field data. So if you want the page editor to work, any fields you render has to be done through the field renderer, pretty much. If you do item and then just output the field, it's not going to work. It won't be editable at all. You can also pass a bunch of, even like the controls like SC text and SC link, they all go through the field renderer. So if you have to use this in code behind, you can pass the same properties into there as you can into the controls. So max width, for example, is just MW equals, max height is NH, that sort of stuff for an image. So everything has to go through there. The second thing you might want to think about is what kind of properties or what kind of fields do I not want to edit? So which ones, if you had a page and it comes up in the page editor, what don't you necessarily want people to be able to edit in the page editor? It breaks it, it's got to do with the metadata. So the D ends with an description, title. If you've got the page editor putting like little frames around your metadata, it completely breaks the page. So you can just pass in disable web editing into here or something like that. Finally, for the field renderer, when you've got a rich text editor field, you can show you what that looks like actually, probably easier. Escape. So like one of these, you've got those little buttons here, and you can just go into the actual full rich text editor. This is another website which I'll get to. There you go, so you get a little bit more choice. But you can control what kind of buttons appear here. So if you only want them to be able to do bold and italics and underline and absolutely nothing else, you've got control over them. So we're kind of getting into making things nicer for the patient, sorry, for the author now. So you do that in the core database. Here. Let's switch to core quickly. So does anybody use rich text editor profiles? Does anybody bother with those? Yes? Oh my god. So for those that don't, rich text editor profiles. There is a folder here called web edit buttons. So if you don't want people to be able, like page editor people, to be able to open the full editor, you can go in here and just change the types of buttons that appear. So you've got full control over that. Yeah, that's it for foundations. So, the stuff you have to do. Componentize, get your designers and UX people on board so they're they kind of accept they have to think in a modular way rather than doing a bespoke piece of art that we then butcher, not on purpose. Talk about or consider data sources, so communicate to UX people that this bit of content can actually be bubbled up somewhere else. They start to think about ways in which they can write their data, write their information or content to be reusable. Use parameters to kind of separate presentation and data even more. Everything must go through field renderer if you want it to actually work in the page editor. Disable editing where you need to and kind of customize things for the author so that it's nicer to use the page editor. But if you've done those things, you can pretty much finish it. I mean, it's going to work, but there are things you can do to make life easier for the author. So, section 2, done foundations, is all about how can I be nice so that the page editor is not a pain to use. I think we'll just go straight into a demo, really. The easiest thing you can do is on your component definition item. So in the content editor, or I can do it here actually. So that's under here. When I say component, I mean like sub-layout, rendering everything, because there's so many different names. So say Spotlight, for example. I want people only to be able to choose a particular type of item from a particular location. So you can do that with editor options. These two fields here, so location and template. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to click and wait is what I'm going to do. Oh yeah, this is Sitecore 7.1, so it's a bit speakish, which looks like this. I forgot it was Sitecore 7.1, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm saying only pick from over here. The template, I can say only allow me to choose things that are Pokemon, which are those little weird triple things for those of you not initiated. Okay? So what I'm doing there is saying that whenever I, as an author, go in and add something here, a spotlight, it's going to make those settings happen. So there. And it's going to pop up and ask me to choose something. So immediately you're avoiding someone picking a weird data source that's not going to work. You're avoiding somebody forgetting to pick a data source that's then going to break everything. And in fact, I don't think I can actually, just make this smaller. I don't think I can actually click OK until I pick something. So I have to pick something. There. So that's step one, making it very difficult for authors to actually mess something up. Step one. The other thing you can do is, remember we talked about parameters, so ways of styling this component. We said, okay, you can type it in there, but that's not very nice. So you can use something called a parameter template, which is a way of adding an extra kind of field in here that kind of obfuscates this a little bit, so the author is not going to see this anymore. I prepared one earlier, especially for you. So again, on my spotlight, which is this thing that I'm using, I can go to, let me say parameter template. Here we go. Go to this parameter template and say, actually, I want to use, and this is just a normal template, with some fields, so I'll go and called color. I actually want to use that now. And if I go back into my site and refresh, I didn't save that time. Spotlight again, choose something, wonderful. If I now go and look at my properties, you see you've got a little drop down here, and I've created some things before. So no longer do I have to go in and type in the name of the field and type in this, which relies on the developer putting in null reference checkers and things. It's just one of those. And that can be anything. That can be an image. It can be, it shouldn't really be an image because that's data, that's not presentation. But like I said, so for example, this is the training site, similar kind of spotlight type thing. That's got loads of them. So we've got, you can hide the image, you can change the image orientation, you can change the style, you can change the heading depending where it is on the page, you can change the width. So you can do whatever you like with these. So anything that's got to do with style variation that your designers should know all about, you can put them into parameters. So that's the second thing. Use parameter templates to make sure that authors don't put in fields that don't exist with values that are not going to work, because they're just going to break things, because they're authors. No, I'm kidding. Because it's not intuitive. It's not very intuitive if you have to scroll down to a list, a dictionary list. The third thing you can do is you can set up restrictions. So what can you and can you not add into a particular placeholder setting? So, for example, when I said clicked here and did add, I have to go and look through this massive list of stuff. I mean, what on earth is a field renderer, an item renderer? As an author, I don't want to see this stuff. I just want to see the stuff I'm allowed to see. So, what you can do is, again, on the settings item for the placeholder, left, you can say what the allowed controls are. So again, a very simple thing you can do to make life easier for the authors. I just want to be able to add a spotlight. There we go. Save that. Now if I try to insert something, it should just give me that. So as an author, I know I'm allowed to put a spotlight in here. It's going to pop up and ask me what content I want to pick, so I don't have to do a lot of searching around for things that developers might have called something a little less intuitive. Okay. Next thing, check. Edit frames and custom experience buttons. So those are simple things you can do. Edit frames and custom experience buttons are, I guess, a little bit more advanced. And they have to do with, if I select this component, you've got a bunch of buttons there. You can extend that list of buttons to do whatever you like. So one thing you can do is, I'm going to go and create some custom experience buttons now. That's done in the core database. Go to core. under, if I can remember this. Web edit, can you remember? Maybe back applications. So in applications and web edit, web edit is like the old name for the page editor. So this is where you can put in your custom experience buttons or your edit frame buttons, which we'll talk about as well. And all they are, I insert one. So I might duplicate one that's quicker. See if we can duplicate nice one. No. There we go. No. There's no insert option set there, which is really bad. There should be. Custom experience buttons. Excuse me, I can't actually remember where they are. Ah, here we go. So I'm going to put in a field editor button, and that's a kind of custom experience button that lets you pop up some fields that are hidden. So I'm going to add that in. There we go. I'm going to call it edit ID, edit Pokemon ID. And I'm going to say, well, I want this button, when pressed, to open the ID field. Give it an icon. I should never have clicked that, actually. That's a bad idea. I'm going to give it one of those. So, custom experience buttons are useful if you want to do something that's not really to do with editing what you see on the screen. So, for metadata, for example, if you want to edit the metadata of the page, you might put like a frame around the entire page that says edit related data or something like that. Or if you've got a list, you might put an edit frame around the list that says allow me to edit the multi-list field that this is associated with, because you don't see that in the actual page editor. So once I've created my little button, I go back to my master database, content editor, on my sub-layout, which is there. There is a list down here. Here we go. There is my button. Select that, save. I'm going to make sure that my field is actually what it's supposed to be. ID is okay. And if I now refresh and select, save again. Spotlight. Circle. I've now got a little button in there. If I click that, it'll open up information that I'm not going to display, like ID, metadata, things like that. And you can do an edit frame as well, which is a variation of custom experience buttons where you decide the area around which these buttons appear. So, probably don't have time to show you, but ultimately you get one of these frames like that, where you can put in maybe just around here, or just around the picture, or you can put it around your entire page so you can edit the metadata. And what you do is you create an SC edit frame and point it to a bunch of buttons, so you do that in your markup. And this is just a simple button. You could write a command for your own that publishes related items, for example, or whatever you can think of, really. But then you just write a little class and it does that. So, I'm going to screenshots. Okay, so this is quite a simple one. When I added a component in here, I got Spotlight with a kind of dotted line blob sort of picture, which I don't know what that means at all. So as a developer, again, you can go in and be nice to the authors and say, actually, I'm going to give you a screenshot of what to expect, what that actually looks like. Sorry, it's saved and then refreshed everything. So this thumbnail, and I don't know if take screenshots is going to work. It tends to take a little while. Yeah. I'm just going to give this a try. It might not work. Yeah. You can just upload one. I've frozen it. This is actually the one bit I have. Welander. Here we go. I'm just going to browse and pick something so that you can get the idea. There we go. My images. So I'm just going to pick one of those, pretend it's a screenshot. Okay. And then when I enter a new one, a new spotlight, then that looks like that. So you can show people what to expect. They're not just going to go, oh, I know that's a spotlight, but what does that actually mean? Does that mean a giant light's going to shine on my screen? So you're improving the experience for the author. And finally, this is kind of like not something you have to do, sample and placeholder data. So what happens if somebody puts a component on the page and then goes into the properties and clears that field? Sometimes it's going to break if you haven't checked for null, like is there a data source? Or it'll just disappear altogether and you'll have this like dead component with no data in it. So a nice way to kind of encourage authors to go in and select a data source if they haven't already is some code here. Websites. One moment. It's using a training site now. Something like this. So, on my training site, which is this one that's used for official Sitecore training now, if I don't specify a data source, so if I go and clear this one because I'm a rogue editor, and that's what I do here. Instead of going completely blank, that now goes sample heading, sample everything, so that they know, okay, I actually need to go and change that now. You can set these to not being editable, so that they won't even be able to change stuff, they just have to go in and change it. And the way to do that is to say, well, second. So all I've done is say, I don't even know if this is the correct word. No, it is. So it's saying that if the ID of the data source doesn't exist, there's nothing in there, then go and use a sample widget, like content manage, fully translatable sample widget, and then get your data from there. The problem is that you might then get authors trying to edit the sample widget, and that's going to change all the time. So to make this better, we could say, okay, show the sample widget, but also do this is not going to work. One second. I just remember what it was called. Just set it to disable web editing. So an author goes in and clears the data source field, and they go, oh crap, sometimes if you haven't put anything in, they're going to lose that, and they're not going to know what to do. So you can point to something else in the tree as a sample, disable editing, and put instructions saying, in order to add something to this widget, you can do X, Y, Z. They're not going to be able to get rid of that data source without doing that. So that's something nice you can do for authors, so that if they forget or mess up, you're still kind of handling that for them. So that's it. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 things that you can do to make the page editor experience nicer for authors, which is, it's quite a sizable chunk of time that you have to spend doing things inside Sitecore to make the page editor nicer. But this is not mandatory. You don't have to do this. This is purely to make the experience enjoyable. And as it's a CMS, you're kind of hoping that the authors are going to want to use it. So, last-ish point. Okay, no, we're good. Detecting page editor mode is quite useful. You can do it in C#, which most of you have probably already done. So you can say, what page mode am I in? You might hide or show like a Twitter feed or kind of external content from the page editor because you don't need them to see that. External content, they have no control over it. It's probably just going to slow down their page load time, so you might hide those. The nice thing is that you can also do this in JavaScript. So there's an object called Sitecore.pageModes that appears if you've got the page editor enabled. And the way I've used that on one of the training sites is to disable animation. So, if we go into preview mode here, I'm not going to save. That's actually a carousel type thing, which is a total pain for an author because they might be in the middle of writing something and then whoosh, off it goes, and it's a pain. So as a backend developer, I can go in and say if it's the page editor, then disable animation, by changing the HTML or something. But this is actually done in JavaScript. So show you what that looks like. JavaScript is at the bottom. So all I'm doing is checking what mode I'm in. So is there a Sitecore.pageModes object? If so, just return page editor as a string. It's not very nice. And then when I'm initializing the slides, I'm just saying if the mode isn't page editor, then initialize. Otherwise, just show me like an expanded view. So it's much easier for me as an author to go in and select the component, and this is true for things like, what do they call this, like expandy type of things. So you can either complete disable animation, you can, show them some other method of changing things, you can just stop the animation so they can still page through, but they don't have to deal with the automatic whoosh, whoosh, whoosh stuff. You can also do this for video. So you could say, if I'm in the page editor mode, actually just load a placeholder of some kind. And it just empowers the front-end developers to be page editor friendly as well, because they've got that object there, they can do whatever they like with it. All the burden doesn't fall on the back-end developer when it's a sort of front-end developer job, or something that they probably know more about. Okay, so 2 ways of detecting page editor. Okay, so having done all that to support the page editor, you do get a lot of things for free, like I said. One of them is because you componentize, you get component caching. So that's pretty much per instance of putting something on the page. Like, I keep forgetting to press F11. Let's go into here, for example. Because we've got a component here, component properties. I can now say, well, is it cached? Do I vary it by data, as in by the type of data sources it is? Do I vary it by who's logged in? Do I vary it whether it's a mobile device or not? So if you don't componentize, you're not going to get these caching options. You're not going to get sort of that granular. So that's bonus number 1. Bonus number 2 is that because you've componentized, you're ready to use the, I can't say DMS, the personalization and analytics features of the Sitecore CEP. Yeah, there we go. So just by componentizing, I can go in and I can personalize all these features. Let's find one that works. Here we go. How to enable analytics in all of those. So I'm here instead. So in the page editor, as an author, I can go in, select this, click on the little 2 people with a pencil button, and I can immediately personalize. And there's no extra work required in order to do that. So I could say, for example, visited holidays. I could say if a person comes onto my website and has visited a specific page, such as the holidays page, come on, in their session, then change the component data source to something else. So because you're supporting the page editor, you've already done the data source bit, you've already done the componentization, you've already done the restrictions, so it's really easy for them to use all this stuff. Let me just change the feature guide. Okay. Save. Yes, that's fine. And if I now go in, let me close that. Maybe because I'm way more thorough. Might have to do this in an incognito window. Oh, I didn't publish. Let's go visit holidays. Visited holidays. I will make this work in a second. Because I'm not published, that's why. That one. So while I make this work, I'll just talk about the next point, which is it's the same thing. So the other thing you get for free when you build for the page editor is you can test really easily, which is this 2 boxes button. It's the same kind of principle. If you set up 2 variations, you can either hide the component or vary whatever it is, or do whatever you like. And because you've componentized and you've set up data source templates and all that, it's going to be a lot easier to do. Like trying to do multivariate testing on like a Sitecore page that's completely static, it kind of doesn't work. You sort of, it's not built to do that. So let me just publish, because I made this work earlier. I practiced it and everything. Second. Let's publish. Is anybody building anything with MVC, Sitecore MVC? Yes? Cool. That's good. Page editor support?
Trying to as much as possible.
Cool. That's good. I can show you that as well. Okay. That's the last bit, and then I'll get out of your hair and you can go and pick beer and things. Okay, let's try this. Try visit the holiday page. Oh, there we go. So the personalization rule was, if you visited the holiday page, show me something else. And as a developer, you have to do absolutely no extra stuff in order for that to work. You can componentize, so there's another plus of making sure you build for the page editor to start with. And the other thing is that anything Sitecore releases in the future is going to rely on this componentization architecture. The page editor will get better. 6.4, I know, wasn't sort of wonderful, but it's a lot more stable now, and things are just working. So you should use it if your client's kind of heard of it. Okay, so before I talk about Sitecore MVC, I was just going to say some quick, watch out for these things. And that is if you've got, say you've got a placeholder and called main, and you put a two-column component in here called two columns, with a placeholder called two columns. So you've got a main placeholder, a two columns placeholder. If you then place another component of exactly the same type, you no longer have one placeholder in a unique location. So you have two-column placeholder and two-column placeholder in here. If you tell Sitecore, like in the page editor, if you go in and say, I want to put a component in the bottom one, when you save, Sitecore's going to go, well, they're not unique. So I'm just going to assume you mean the first one. So it's not going to work. You can get around that by using a, I can't remember, Clarity, do you remember? They did a component, like a module?
They did it on so.
No. So they did a module where it would add in like an ID at the very end to give you a unique placeholder name. So you could use that as a kind of, to get around that problem. So that's number one. Number two, I guess, is kind of more general about the HTML. So it's about putting things in like a line. If you have three components you put in a line, you have to make sure that you either restrict height of those components, because authors can move them around whatever way they want. Otherwise, you're going to get float issues, which I'm sure you have to do front-end development work you know about. But there is no kind of super quick, easy way, because you can't use columns, right? If you can't put two columns next to like in a row like that, you kind of have to solve the floating problem in another way. So you can use, tell authors to do it by eye, or set up a validation rule so they can only put in a certain amount of text that's not going to break things, set max heights on things so that you're consistent with the design. But there's no real easy fix around it, so watch out for it. Last bit. So we know how to build for the page editor generally. We know how to make things nice for the author. We've looked at ways that you can use page editor detection to make things nice for the author. The final thing is Sitecore MVC. Operates in pretty much exactly the same way. You can still build with components. They're just called different things now. And you can still make things page editor friendly in pretty much exactly the same ways, but with a few MVC-esque differences. So I'm just going to show you an example of a site that is, where is it? Oh, there it is. So this is an MVC site. These are view renderings here. But as you can see, they do exactly the same thing. I can select them. I can move them around. Move this over here. It's going to break now because I haven't done my HTML properly. But exactly the same principles apply. You can make things nice for the page editor, for the page editor author in exactly the same way. You don't have to do anything different. You can customize your rich text editor so it's easier to use. All that's still the same. The only thing that's slightly different is the way in which you use the field renderer to make things nice. And that looks like this. Show you some code behind. Where is it? This is my organized folder. Let's see. User. Car. There we go. Okay. So it's not the IntelliSense is not going to work, so I apologize. But I'll just make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. So, what's the name of the method you have to go through in order to be able to make things work in the page editor? Field render or render. The MVC version of that is the this bit here. So you've got the Sitecore helper. That's pretty much where you'll find everything. And .field goes through the field renderer ultimately. If you look through the kernel, you'll see, the Sitecore MVC DLL, you'll see that eventually that makes its way back to field renderer.render in the kernel. You pass in your field name here, just like you normally would. You pass in your item. .item on this thing, the rendering model, which is the default model, means the data source. If you want the page, so whatever item you're currently looking at, it's .page item. So it kind of does that data source thing a little bit for you already. And finally, if you want to pass in parameters, so max width, max height for images, text for links, for example, you just do it as one of these objects. So there's some examples on here. I'm passing in max width there. I'm passing in text here. So these are the equivalents. This is the equivalent to what you would use SC text and SC image and all that for, but in Sitecore MVC. Okay. And placeholders are kind of the same thing, really. You're still using the helper, but you're still passing in a string key for MVC. So really no difference. Page editor is going to work. You're going to be able to move components around. Things look editable in the page editor. Those of you who have used MVC, have you come across any issues with the page editor and MVC? No? So it works. Wonderful. So really, from an author's point of view, they shouldn't care. They should just think, I'm creating items, that's content, I'm designing my pages, and they shouldn't really care what the engine is underneath. I believe that is maybe it. Yes, that's Pokemon. Thanks. That's everything on the page editor. Does anybody have any questions about MVC or the page editor or anything? No?
I haven't sort of made one. We went a bit mad with parameters. They're not multilingual, are they? So
No.
be pretty careful what to use them for. Do you have any advice on?
Well, pretty much like you said, they're not translatable. They're shared. I did have a problem where I had a field, or I had an item rather, which had a field that I was referencing, and it wasn't shared and unversioned, so it changed per language. So when a translator went through and saw the word red, which was referencing a class in the CSS, they changed that to röd, and also the Japanese version, and it obviously broke the site for them, and it took a bit of hunting to kind of figure out what's going on. So any settings that are language independent, just make sure they are set up that way. That's pretty much it. Any other questions?
This might not have a good answer to be honest, but
That's
it's something I've come up against a few times. So on your car website,
Yeah.
we had make and model. Typically we'd use a labels dictionary to
Do the making
screen,
one? Yeah.
which is the way that Sitecore tells you to do it. But because then they're not part of the data source, they're not IMV testing, they're not personalizable.
Oh, the labels.
Yeah, so the only way that I know that you can fix that is then by putting them into the data, which sort of gets rid of your separation of concern.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if there's
I haven't even thought of that. I would also put my labels into. Has anybody seen dictionaries? Think they are? Anybody not? I'm going to assume people who aren't running or don't know what they are, because I'm going to show you. Dictionaries are very useful, but like you said, they aren't really testable. I hadn't really thought about the fact that you need to test labels, but you do.
Can you not just assign the labels from the fixed as well? It's not very good.
well, you can, but that just means that the the stuff that might stay click here is part of the data which may not be relevant to other sort of things.
Before I discovered dictionaries, I used to use just like a kind of quick-memo dictionary items, but it gets really ugly, and if you have 90 fields in an item, eventually it starts to complain. So for those of you that aren't aware, a dictionary is in system, you've got this dictionary thing. You can add dictionary of terms, so an entry like that. And it just means that exactly for labels or anything that isn't really data, kind of back to top, you know, the kind of little micro text, you can put in a key, like my label, and then it's translatable. So this can now be working reference or something like that. I don't know, there isn't really a...
We had a customer who wanted to do anything. Test.
I suppose if they absolutely need to ANVI test down to that kind of level, you sort of have to get the data from somewhere else.
If you want to put form labels in a better place, you can make an item that's a child with a page, use that to represent the data of the form.
Or maybe do like make it conditional, so if test exists or something, they get it from here, otherwise get it from the dictionary. Because I'm assuming they're not going to want to test forever, they're going to want to test until they get something nice. So you could do something like that. So,
Really useful about personalization.
Well,
yeah.
I didn't expect it to be a
No, but it's a
clean answer,
discussion.
to be honest.
It's a discussion. That's discussions. Any other questions about HTML or like UX people or anything like that?
With metaphors, could you just put them in the ribbon?
Oh, as in, could you put a open line? Yeah. Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, you can customize this and add a button and then get it to fire a command. Yeah, do that. You probably go to the core database and do that as well. I haven't got an example, but yeah, you can definitely do that. Yeah, questions? We made amazing time. Okay, that's it from me then. Thank you very much.